Okay, brethren, last week we started looking at the book of Daniel, not every verse of every chapter, a sort of abbreviated view of the key points. The book of Daniel is one of the more important books in terms of prophecy, at least. The book of Revelation would be the other important key book on prophecy, and yet the book of Revelation refers back many times to the book of Daniel. So if you want to understand the book of Revelation, which I guess we do, the book of Daniel is a pretty good place to start. There are many key aspects of Daniel which appear in Revelation. You could almost say vice versa, perhaps. So last week we started looking at it. We got through chapters 1 to 4, so we pick up chapter 5 shortly. But just a reminder of what we covered last week. Daniel 1 tells us about the beginning of Daniel's journey to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was the then king of Babylon. He came to Jerusalem and Judea and had I think 3 attempts in total before he finally destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple in 586 BC. But the chapter 1 starts around about 605 BC, the first time that Nebuchadnezzar approached Jerusalem, started fighting against it, and at that point he took away a number of nobles, royal family and so on, including Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. They were taken to Babylon, to, if you like, the headquarters of the then world empire. Hey, think about it, that's quite interesting. Daniel, probably a young man, I suspect maybe a teenager, and here he is in Babylon, one of the great cities of the day, huge, beautiful, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and he's going to be going through like a 3-year college course where he'll learn about the literature, the mathematics, the astronomy, the language of Babylon. And because he's bright, he ends up being selected to actually work in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. So one of God's men, as he turns out to be a great man of God, is actually the headquarters of the world's empire. Pretty good. So that was Daniel chapter 1. In Daniel chapter 2, we have the famous dream of Nebuchadnezzar, this great statue with a head of gold and chest and shoulders of silver, midriff of bronze and then legs of iron. Then a stone comes and smashes it on the feet. It topples over and gets blown away. And Nebuchadnezzar wants to know, well, what does that mean? I'm stunned by my dream. What's the interpretation of it? And God gives the interpretation to Daniel, who explains it to Nebuchadnezzar. You are the head of gold, and so on. So it details 4 empires, 4 kingdoms that run from Nebuchadnezzar's day all the way to the return of Jesus Christ, the stone that smashes the statue on its feet. All right, so we've looked at that. That's a key prophecy, the great image of Daniel chapter 2. There is dispute, as we've covered many times, about the legs of iron. Popular view, one I used to subscribe to, is that the iron legs are the Roman Empire, right? But that doesn't fit biblically, because the legs of iron, it says, will crush, break in pieces and pulverize all the ones that came before it. And Rome didn't. Rome never defeated Babylon, the gold, never defeated MEDO-PERSIA, the silver. It didn't pulverize Greece. In fact, the Romans quite admired Greece. They defeated their army, but then they pretty much absorbed everything else. The mythology, the architecture, the literature, the language, the gods and goddesses, right? So Rome never pulverized, smashed to pieces Greece, and never defeated the silver or the gold. So Rome doesn't fit. Like I said before many times, Islam does fit very comfortably. Chapter 3, we have Nebuchadnezzar erecting a big obelisk, it appears, which people are to worship. So when the orchestra plays, the bagpipes start going, you are to kneel down and worship this big obelisk. If you don't, you'll be thrown into a fiery furnace. A test, amongst other things, for Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, who realize that we can't do that because our God is Jehovah. So they're going to be faithful, and they refuse to bow down. So Nebuchadnezzar gives them a second chance, and they say, essentially, get stuffed, and he throws them into the fiery furnace, where rather than burning up, they walk about quite happily with a 4th person in the furnace with them. Nebuchadnezzar is stunned, of course, calls them out, can't believe what he's seeing, and he sends an edict, a decree out to the whole world. Nobody better speak against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. An important decree. And then in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has another dream of a great tree that's chopped down, just a stump is left. Doesn't know what it means. Daniel assists as always. Doesn't like what he sees in this dream. Turns out, of course, Nebuchadnezzar, because of his pride and his arrogance, is going to be humbled by God. And he's humbled because he loses his mind. For 7 years he lives out in the wild with the oxen and the rabbits and the hedgehogs, right, covered in the dew and so on. And 7 years he's restored to his sanity. And then chapter 4 of the book of Daniel is actually the testimony, the personal testimony of a Gentile king. So we've got the Bible, God's word, but that chapter is actually a personal testimony. It says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, it's in the first person, I, Nebuchadnezzar, saw this and did this and this happened to me. And now I understand the great God of heaven, Jehovah, is the God. And everybody better worship the true God, right? And all of that's in Aramaic. From chapter 2 to chapter 7 is Aramaic language, because that's the language of everybody, pretty much, in the empire, the Middle East empires of those days. So that ensures that the statue, that the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar the king, everybody can read it, because it's in the language that everybody speaks, Aramaic, not just in Hebrew. Chapter 1 is Hebrew, chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 are Hebrew, the rest of the Bible is Hebrew, or New Testament, of course, is Greek, but the whole world of this day can read this. And there's Nebuchadnezzar sending out at least 2 decrees to all the lands that he rules over, saying, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the God who's humbled me, this is the God. So, God's reputation is being, quite well published in these days, right? So that's where we got to last week. So let's pick up the story now in Daniel chapter 5. Read verses 1 to 4. This is Belshazzar's feast, is the heading in my Bible. Verses 1 to 4. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father or forefather Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. It's going to be an X-rated party. Wine, women and song everywhere, right? And partway through, as his brain's a bit addled with the alcohol, he calls for all these cups and saucers and vessels to be brought to him from probably a museum in Babylon, where Nebuchadnezzar would have put all the artifacts he collected on his conquests. So they call for them to be the ones to be brought from Jerusalem, from the temple. They're going to drink from them. Is that really wise? I don't think so. Verse 3, then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine, I assume lots of it, and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. So using the vessels from God's temple to sort of host and to the god Marduk, to Baal, to Asherah, to whatever, right? Because God's watching this, and I'm sure not entirely impressed. Verses 5 and 6. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. The writing on the wall. We still use that expression today, don't we? The writing on the wall usually means doom is approaching. There's the writing on the wall. You can say that about America. The writing's on the wall. About Britain, the writing's on the wall. Because our civilizations, societies look like they're in terminal decline. The writings on the wall, that's where it comes from, the Bible. Verse 6, then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. Perhaps he stood up to have a closer look. As he stood up, his legs went under him and he probably fell on the floor. Combination of alcohol, wine, and fear, I would imagine, seeing this writing on the wall. What does it mean? Right? Well, I think we've actually got a photograph taken at the time by Mr. Rembrandt, famous photographer of ancient times. That's probably the most famous painting of Belshazzar's feast. So up at the shiny part on the top right are the letters on the wall. That's Belshazzar there looking somewhat bemused and perplexed, and all around him his courtiers are busy falling over from alcohol. So that's what we're thinking about here. And so, of course, he calls for his experts, the astrologers, soothsayers, the experts, to come along and tell him, well, what does that say? What does that mean? But nobody can read it, right? Perhaps it was ancient Hebrew. Perhaps they couldn't read the ancient Hebrew letters of the alphabet. Perhaps it was something else. But eventually, the Queen Mother comes along and says, there's a guy here that your forefather found very helpful, Daniel. So Daniel's called, and of course Daniel has the Spirit of God, figures out what it says, and more than that, what it means. So let's pick up the story, verse 17 through 31. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, because the king had said, if you can read that, I'm going to reward you mightily. You'll become even the third most important person in the kingdom. Let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father or forefather a kingdom and majesty, glory and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Oops. Don't get on his bad side then. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. Whomever he wished, he put down. So I think Nebuchadnezzar, as we said last week, an exceptional human being. You know, God worked with him a number of times over many years, eventually bringing him down and humbling him. And then at the end of that, Nebuchadnezzar said, Jehovah God, he is God. So I think Nebuchadnezzar was converted finally to God. I expect to see Nebuchadnezzar in God's kingdom. Exceptional individual. And of course not an Israelite. Verse 20, but when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. But you, his son, or descendant, more accurately I suppose, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. This was the problem, or at least one of the problems. Belshazzar knew the story. Belshazzar could have read the decree that Nebuchadnezzar sent out. Belshazzar may have had the original. I mean, I imagine copies were sent around the kingdom to tell people what the testimony was of Nebuchadnezzar. But I imagine Belshazzar, being the king and in the king's palace, probably had access, if he wished to the original document, perhaps handwritten, by Nebuchadnezzar. So he knew the whole story. He wasn't ignorant. He had no excuse. He knew what Nebuchadnezzar had done and been through and how it ended up. And yet, verse 23, you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought you the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know, and the God who holds your breath in his hands and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. That's your problem. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. Right? This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, which I think is the Aramaic for to count or to number. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Your days are numbered. We still use that expression, don't we? Oh, his days are numbered. That means the chopper's about to come down. And of course it was for Belshazzar. He died this very night. And that very night, same night, is the end of the Babylonian Empire. That began the days, well, began before Nebuchadnezzar, but he was probably his greatest sort of king. That empire period ends this night. So many, number. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, which is the verb to weigh in the Aramaic. You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. I think we still use that, to weigh up in the balances. Yeah, he's been weighed. And he's lightweight. Right? Nothing there. Perez, which means to divide, to split in two. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar, when he heard the interpretation, meaning, gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple, put a chain of gold around his neck, made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. I think Belshazzar's father was Nabonidus, who was actually the number one in the kingdom, but wasn't there at the time. I think he was in Arabia. So he'd be number one, Belshazzar number two. Now Daniel's going to be number three for a few hours. Because within a few hours it's all over. Didn't give much time to enjoy being number three in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And Darius the MEDO-PERSIan, received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So that's the end of Belshazzar. That's also the end of Babylon as the sovereign ruling nation of the day. Right? All happened that night. So that's quite sort of dramatic. And I said the key problem for Belshazzar is he knew the history. He knew about Nebuchadnezzar. It wasn't something done, in a sort of hidden manner. Nebuchadnezzar was well known. The whole people of all the lands had talked about his experiences, read his decrees and so on. They knew about Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the fiery furnace. They knew about Nebuchadnezzar being out in the wild for 7 years. Of course they would have known that. He was the ruler. He's the emperor. And he's not around for 7 years. The whole story is well known, and Belshazzar had, I'm sure, plenty of opportunity to repent and humble himself, but he didn't. And so, what happened was well merited. Moving on to chapter 6 is Daniel in the lion's den. Great story if you're a child. I know when when our boy was very young, like I'm sure many parents, you try and find these little Bible storybooks to read to your kids, get them interested in the Bible and what it says. And of course, some of these stories are very popular for little books for little children. And I remember we had one that was called Baby in a Basket, a little tiny book. Talk about Moses being put in the River Nile for safety by his mum and his sister, watching over until Pharaoh's daughter came and rescued Baby in a Basket.
We had a whole series.
You got a whole series of Daniel in the Lion's Den. Another one, great illustrations, of course, as well. Another one was, I think, one of the parables, Henry, the lost sheep. The sheep that got lost and the shepherd was out looking for it. Well, that was Henry, partly, going to our little book, Henry, the lost sheep. But yeah, and of course, Noah's Ark. There's lots of stories, and Daniel.
We had them all, and we had these singing cassettes.
Yeah, we've probably got some music as well that goes with it.
Salty
So,
songbook.
Daniel in the lion's den. So Daniel at this stage is super regarded by the king, who's thinking at this stage here of making him numero uno over the entire empire. Only subject, of course, to the king himself, but others are a bit jealous of that. those others who are high up in the totem pole don't like the idea of this Jew boy becoming a Jew boy. He's about, I think, probably 60, 70, 80 here, right? Getting on a bit now. And so they decide to trap him. But they say to each other, well, we can't find anything about his character to accuse him of because he's a man of impeccable integrity. Not like today's politicians, right? You have wheelbarrows full of scandals with most of them. But Daniel, they said, well, the only thing we could possibly find to accuse him of would be something to do with his religion. The man is honest and hardworking and diligent and just a nice guy. But in terms of religion, we'll get him there. So they decide to trap him. So they go to the king and say to the king, we want to suggest you pass a law saying that nobody anywhere in the empire can petition anybody other than you for the next 30 days. Is that a good idea, O king? Well, yes, good idea. I'll be it. Anybody who wants anything has to come to me. So he issues the law, signs it off. It's the law of the Medes and Persians, which once enacted cannot be changed, and out it goes. Of course, this is a problem, potentially, for Daniel because, well, he's got to petition the God of heaven, isn't he? He's not going to stop talking to God because it's his custom for all of his life. And of course, he knows God will look after him, so he continues to go to God and petition Jehovah God in heaven. We pick up the story there, verses 10 through 18. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, this new law, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, or 3 times every day, I think the Hebrew implies, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Nothing new. He always prayed 3 times a day, and he's doing it this day, like every other day. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. How'd they do that? Right? Was there somebody outside his window sort of peering in with a periscope sort of thing? People are standing at his door with their ears, listening. I can hear him praying. He's asking God something. Is that what they did? Did they have a CCTV camera? Perhaps like espionage style, put in his bedroom. They can see him praying out the window towards Jerusalem. One way or another, they found out. And I think they spent all day looking because they say later he did it 3 times. So they must have watched him in the morning and lunchtime and evening. So there they go. Verse 12. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Didn't you do that, O king? The king answered and said, that thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. So they must have watched at least a day duration to know it was 3 times that day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased. But not with Daniel. He was greatly displeased with himself, because he realized he'd been trapped, right? He'd been mugged by his own courtiers. He was greatly displeased with himself. If he'd thought about it, he'd realize that, well, what might happen if I passed this law? Oh, maybe Daniel wouldn't respond that way because he's going to be faithful to his God in heaven. I know the man. So that would be a problem. So I don't want to sign this law. It doesn't make sense to me. But he was probably flattered. Oh, yeah, of course. But I'm the only person anybody can approach for anything. Oh, yeah, great. Oh, yeah, that suits me. So he signs it. And now he realizes what a plonker he'd been. And the king, verse 14, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. I guess he's looking for some sort of legal loophole. Maybe you're looking at the Constitution in the US of A. With the Constitution, there's all these amendments. Perhaps we look more closely and stretch one slightly. We can find a loophole to get something done. He's probably trying his best with his experts to find some sort of loophole in this law that he could employ to save Daniel. But of course he can't. Verse 15. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed." Once you've done it, that's it. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." But he's got his fingers all crossed, and he's probably just being hopeful rather than confident. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. So Daniel is in the lion's den. Again, we have a photograph taken at the time of Daniel. There he is, obviously the gentleman on the left there, in his lovely purple garment, and a number of hungry lions. Right? So would you fancy that? Verse 18. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, meaning he's not eating or drinking, and no musicians were brought before him. Not even Taylor Swift was allowed to play in the bedroom. Also his sleep went from him, because he's obviously feeling upset. He's probably frustrated. He'd been tricked by his courtiers. He's very nervous and frightened about Daniel's chances. He probably feels very guilty because he's been, mugged this way. Then the king arose very early in the morning, as soon as any hint of light, and went in haste to the den of lions. When he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice, but dubious, you see, to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Is that possible? Are you there, Daniel? Hello, Daniel? Speak to me, Daniel." Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." Of course, that's completely true. Just the king's stupid law, that was the problem. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. Pretty good, right? But then, verse 24, the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, all collected together, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den, proving the lions were fit and hungry. So they ignored Daniel all night long, but when this bunch of folk come tumbling down, they'll chomp on them instantly.
Oh,
right?
Christians again.
I guess that's is that what they call karma, perhaps, for these guys, or you reap what you sow. They're trying to get Daniel put to death because of their jealousy, and now they end up being put to death because of their jealousy. So you be careful what you sow. Then King Darius wrote, "To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree." Another one. Nebuchadnezzar had 2 decrees. After the fiery furnace incident with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he sent a decree out in Aramaic. After his experience being out in the wild for 7 years and being humbled, he sent a decree out to all the world in Aramaic, pointing people to Jehovah God. Darius is doing the same. This is in Aramaic still, chapter 6. So he's a decree, verse 26, "I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed. His dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on the earth. who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So, God's name, God's mighty works are being spread in an incredible manner around the world of that time by, Nebuchadnezzar, the great king of Babylon, by Darius here, the great king of Persia, right? So people have heard the truth and, pretty good, really. And so we come to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 is the final chapter of Aramaic Daniel. So the Aramaic portion of Daniel starts in chapter 2, runs to the end of chapter 7. Once we get to chapter 8, and subsequently it's back to Hebrew. This is the final part that would be in a language that anybody who could read. I don't know how many could read in those days. I suspect probably quite a lot. But if you could read, then in those days this was written in a language that you could understand. Or somebody could read it to you. Hebrew, trickier. That's more of a narrow language that really only the Israelites, the Jews, could read. But Aramaic, anybody can read Aramaic in those days. So in chapter 7, we're going to read about 4 beasts, picturing 4 kingdoms. We're going to read about the return of Jesus Christ, the establishment of the kingdom of God on the earth forever. So, pretty important stuff. And there's an echo of chapter 2 in chapter 7, but they're not the same. There's quite a few differences. I think I've come across a lot of people that say chapter 7 is just a repeat of chapter 2, but chapter 2 is the statue with 4 metals. Chapter 7 is 4 beasts, but they're just the same, really. It's the same message. Well, it's not the same message at all. Very different message. Same characters, same 4 empires, same 4 kingdoms, but the story is entirely different. Daniel chapter 2 is the history starting in Nebuchadnezzar's day in Babylon for 2,500 years up to the return of Jesus Christ. That's Daniel 2. Daniel 7 is the same 4 kingdoms or empires, but all of them are at the end time. It's not history at all. All 4 are end time, right? So there's an echo because it's the same kingdoms, but the timing is entirely different, right? So let's read Daniel 7, verse 1, and then verses 17 to 18. So Daniel 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. So earlier we had Nebuchadnezzar having a couple of dreams. This time Daniel's got his own direct dream, right? And it's a big dream. There's a lot of key things in this chapter, in this dream that Daniel had. So he writes down the main key facts for us. But let's drop down and read verses 17 and 18 just to get a little bit of perspective here. Verse 17 is an angel now popped up to give Daniel some insight. Those great beasts, which are 4 kings which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So Daniel's seen 4 great beasts in his dream, and the angel says, verse 17, these great beasts, which are 4 kings or kingdoms or empires, whichever you prefer, which arise out of the earth. Ultimately, the saints will possess the kingdom forever. That's God's kingdom being established once these 4 kingdoms are over and behind, right? But it says here, 4 kings which arise. Now, most translations bring out that we're talking here about 4 kings or kingdoms which will arise, right? Which will arise after this vision, after this dream. Now, you probably can't say that, I don't think, fairly about Babylon, because Belshazzar, in whose reign Daniel gets his vision, Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon. But it's read about his end, right? The writing on the wall, and then that particular night he's slain. That's the end of Belshazzar, that's the end of Babylon. You couldn't really say here, I think, sensibly, these are 4 kingdoms or empires that will arise when the vision arrives in the last year or 2 of its final king. Babylon's finished at this stage. Its days are numbered, right? It's over and done. It's finished. So when it says here, 4 kingdoms which shall arise, I think that's looking at the future, very much in the future. These 4 kings will arise. We've got, I think, a slide which gives some other versions there. I can't read it entirely from where I am, but you've got the New American Standard Bible. These are 4 kings who will arise. The Amplified, 4 kings who shall arise. The NIV, 4 kings that will rise. And there's a couple of others here you can see. So the predominant number of modern translations bring out these are 4 kings or kingdoms or empires that will in the future arise. You can't apply that, I don't think, sensibly to Babylon will arise, because Babylon's just about finished. It's down to its last 24 months. It's not going to rise. It's been arising and been around for decades and decades and decades, all through Nebuchadnezzar's reign and so on. And Babylon is now finished. It's not going to rise. I think that means we can look at this chapter as things that will arise in the distant future. Now, there's an interesting structure. If you want to find more about it, you can have a look on Google and say the term chiasmus, chiasmus, chiasmus or chiastic structures. And these are structures which are sort of symmetrical structures. But here you've got, for example, chapter 2 and chapter 7 go together as a pairing. Chapter 2, 4 metals, prophecy of 4 empires or kingdoms. Chapter 7, 4 beasts, 4 kingdoms, right? Chapters 3 and 6, they go together. Chapter 3 is about delivering saints of God from a fiery furnace. Chapter 6, delivering the saint of God, Daniel, from the lion's den. Chapters 4 and 5 go together. Chapter 4, a king, Nebuchadnezzar, who humbles himself under God. Chapter 5, another king, Belshazzar, who rejects God and gets destroyed for it. So this interesting structure. So chapter 2 and 7, therefore, are paired together, but they're not the same. Same empires, same kingdoms, same nations, right? But not the same story. Daniel 2 is a long story over 2,500 years of one after another, after another, after another, until we get to God's kingdom. Chapter 7 is all about the end time. These 4 beasts are end time beasts. At least that's my considered opinion. Nebuchadnezzar agrees with me. Right, let's read Daniel 2 then. Daniel 7, sorry. Look into these beasts in more detail. Let's read verses 2 to 8. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So there's a lion beast. Verse 5, and suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side, had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another beast, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, strong, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. Not unlike the 4th beast of the Daniel 2 image, which was iron. Here this has got iron teeth. That iron empire broke in pieces. That was one of the key characteristics. Remember DEQAQ, D-E-Q-A-Q, the iron legs broke in pieces, DEQAQ, pulverized, smashed to smithereens, all those that went before it. Well, here it says here, this 4th beast devours, breaks in pieces. It's DEQAQ again. And there's iron teeth. So you can see the echo of the 4th empire. This is the 4th beast. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Well, if there's 4 beasts, and the 3rd beast, the leopard, had 4 heads, that gives us a total of 7 heads, right? And 10 horns. 7 heads and 10 horns. We'll see later that's the beast of Revelation 13. a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Here are 7 heads, here are 10 horns. I was considering the horns, verse 8, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. And I think we have a couple of slides we can show you. Again, photographs taken at the time. There's our lion with his wings, the bear, and the leopard with its 4 wings like a bird and its 4 heads there. And there's the 4th beast, or at least an artist's impression of it. Dreadful and terrible, different from all the others, right? And destroys all the others. So these beasts are an echo of the 4 metals of chapter 2, which gives us a clue as to exactly what nations and kingdoms they represent. So the lion represents Babylon, which today we call Iraq, Muslim country. The bear represents MEDO-PERSIA, which we call Iran today. Right. The leopard represents Greece, or better would be Javan, or possibly pronounced Yavan, Javan or Yavan, which is largely the area around Asia Minor and surrounding areas. Nowadays that would be mostly Western Turkey. But it does say that the leopard has got 4 heads, which suggests a confederation of 4 nations or 4 countries working together to create the leopard beast. And those 4 heads, as far as I can make out, would be Turkey. Turkey is the second most powerful military nation in NATO, so there's a lot of stuff there, a lot of missiles there, a lot of tanks there, a lot of soldiers there, powerful nation. Western Asia Minor, Western Javan, that would be Turkey. And I think along with that, we're probably looking at speculation, the 4 being Turkey, Egypt, Syria, and Albania.
Half of them live here now.
Syria is attached to Turkey. They have a bit of a friction a lot of the time, but there's a lot of closeness there as well. Egypt, of course, is a major nation in that part of the world. You might say Albania, I thought it was in Europe. Well, Albania is in Europe, but the Albanians and the ancient Greeks were actually related very strongly. And if you're looking at a Muslim nation, which Turkey is Muslim, Egypt's Muslim, Syria is Muslim, Albania is a majority Muslim country as well. So those are my 4 speculative guesses as to the 4 heads of the leopard. And then the great terrible beast with the iron teeth that decacks, that breaks in pieces, would be Islam, as we've said before, right? So let's move on and read verses 13 to 14. I was watching the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, that would be the Father, and they brought him near before him. A lot of hymns there. They brought him, the Son of Man, near before him, the Ancient of Days, I think. Then to him, the Son of Man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Talking of Jesus inheriting the kingdom of God, which will last forever, once the others are gone, right? Now it says there in verse 13, one like the Son of Man. I said before, that's Jesus' favourite description and title for himself, right? So when you see in the Gospels Jesus saying, the Son of Man will do this, the Son of Man does that, the Son of Man such and such, Jesus is talking of himself, and that's his favourite title. And he's pointing to this verse here. The Son of Man is the great being who goes to the Ancient of Days and is given the kingdoms of the whole world to rule over forever. That's the Son of Man. There's other titles that Jesus has. He calls himself the Son of David once. He calls himself the Son of God 5 times. He calls himself the Messiah, the Christ, 11 times. He calls himself the Son of Man 78 times. Not even close. That's his favourite expression for who he is. And when he uses that expression, it doesn't mean I'm a human being. He means I am the Son of Man that you disciples have read about in the book of Daniel, the Son of Man being the being who goes up to the Ancient of Days and receives the rule of the whole world. That's who I am. That's quite a key reference from him. So let's carry on. Chapter 7 again. Let's read verses 19 to 27. So Daniel, pretty curious, as we all are. Then I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast, especially, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron, its nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, Decak, and trampled the residue with its feet, just like the iron of Daniel 2, and the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth, which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. He was curious about this fourth beast, the horns, and the little pompous horn particularly, right? I was watching, and the same horn, little horn, was making war against the saints. Ooh. And prevailing against them, double ooh, until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favour of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So that's the kingdom of God being established there, right? Until the Ancient of Days came and the judgment is made and the saints possess the kingdom. So that means that this pompous horn is going to make war against the saints and prevail against them until the kingdom of God is established. Again, I think that's an end-time prophecy. We're not talking here about the pompous horn making war against the saints in the Middle Ages or earlier. This, in context, is about just running up to the return of Jesus Christ and the Ancient of Days establishing the kingdom, which happens at Jesus' return. Thus he said, verse 23, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. I think the difference to me is likely the fact that the other kingdoms, the lion, the bear, the leopard, are actual physical nations. We're looking at Iraq, we're looking at Iran or Persia, we're looking at Greece, Asia Minor, Turkey, whereas the fourth beast isn't actually just a nation. It's the Islamic Empire, which spreads over multiple nations and multiple parts of the world, driven by religion. So I think that's the difference between it and the previous empires. Verse 24, the 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones and shall subdue 3 kings. There's 10 kings, which I think are 10 nations working together in the Islamic Empire of those days, 10 Islamic nations, I guess. But this pompous little horn subdues or suppresses 3 of them, right? Which 3? Which 3 kings are suppressed? Well, my speculation is Libya, Egypt, and Sudan. And that's mentioned in Daniel 11 when we get there, if you remember. If I remember, I'll refer back to this. So I think the 3 kings who will be suppressed, put down by this little horn, who, by the way, is the Antichrist. That's another name for him. The Antichrist is the little horn, right? He's going to suppress Libya, Egypt, and Sudan. Speculative. But it's mentioned in Daniel 11. You go ahead and look if you want, but I'm not going to go there now. He, this little horn, shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time, 3.5 years. Now the word saints is in italics in my Bible, so it's not in the original. And in fact, many translations just put they will be given into his hand for 3.5 years. Like the New American Standard Bible, the English Standard Bible, then they shall be given into his hand for times and half a time, 3.5 years. That suggests it's possibly referring to the bit before, which is to change times and law, and times and law will be given into his hand, his authority, for 3.5 years. That may be a reference to Sharia law, Because if it's Islam we're talking about, and I've said many times in the past, Islam to me fits no matter where I'm looking, whether it's Revelation 6 or when I'm looking at Revelation 17 or 18 or Daniel 2 or Daniel 7, Islam to me pops up everywhere. But if it's Islam, then the law that they most likely want to change is whatever law you've got, to change it to Sharia law, the law of Muhammad, the law of the Quran. That's the law that many Muslims want. That's the law many Muslims operate under in certain majority Islamic countries. Even here in the UK, there was a poll about 5 years ago, I think it was, asking Muslims in Britain, would you like Sharia law? And the answer was about 40% of British Muslims would be happy to see Sharia law apply in Britain. Well, they can't get it at the moment because there are a minority of British people are Muslims, but it's growing, and already they're starting to push their independent choices forward into Parliament as MPs. There's quite a bit of Muslim influence now feeding through into our Parliament, and you can only imagine that in a few more years' time, as more Muslims arrive from Pakistan and Afghanistan and other parts of the globe, that their interest will be in establishing Sharia law. Some parts of the country, it's believed Sharia law is already applying, at least in some towns and villages here and there. I think Ontario in Canada, it's been mentioned. Sharia law currently being used to help sort out differences in marriage and divorce and child rearing in Muslim communities. But this will go much further than that. Replace your law based upon Christendom and the Bible with Sharia law. So that's possibly what that's referring to. Again, that's speculative.
26.
I want to go back and read another verse earlier on. I think I may have missed somewhere on the line. I'm going to read verses 11 and 12 because there's a point I think we can make there. So going back in chapter 7 to verses 11 and 12. So we've seen, these four beasts and impressed by them, particularly the fourth beast. But verse 11, I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which this little horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain. That's the fourth beast. That's with the 10 horns and the little pompous horn comes up. I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, the other three, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So what that suggests is these four beasts, the fourth beast is slain and its body burned. The empire is destroyed. But the other three beasts, it says their dominions taken away, their rule, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Well, that suggests to me that all these four beasts are concurrent. They all live at the same time. All these four empires exist side by side, right? So it says. One of them, the fourth one, the terrible one, is destroyed, body burned. The other three continue living, right? So these are all, again, to me, that's evidence this is an end time prophecy, an end time chapter, because Daniel 2 gives us Babylon, which disappears, replaced by MEDO-PERSIA, which disappears, replaced by the Iron Empire, by the Bronze Empire, Greece, Alexander the Great, which disappears. So Daniel 2 is consecutive empires, each one disappearing as it's replaced by the next. But here, these four seem to exist together, right? Because the fourth is destroyed, slain, and burned up, but the other three continue beyond that for some time. And they were living along with the fourth. So again, to me, this is a clear evidence that Daniel 7 is an end time prophecy. Okay, so I didn't want to miss that because I think it just helps to confirm that these are four empires that will arise and four empires that exist side by side at the same time, one being killed and the other three carrying on for a bit longer, right? And I think Daniel 7 and these four beasts that we've looked at and what they do and accomplish is the explanation of the beast of the end times in Revelation 13. So let's turn there in closing. So Revelation chapter 13. Gin, lovely. Revelation chapter 13. Like I said before, I'm sure I've said it a million times, if not more. The book of Revelation is built upon the book of Daniel. Some people have counted, I've forgotten the number now, but there's umpteen references in the book of Revelation to Daniel. So if you want to understand the book of Revelation, a good place to start would be not at chapter 1 necessarily, but in the book of Daniel. Once we understand Daniel, or at least get a reasonable outline of it, the book of Revelation, I won't say it falls into place, that would be exaggerating a little bit, but the book of Revelation is easier to understand if we've got the book of Daniel, at least vaguely in our minds. So we've got those 4 beasts mentioned there in Daniel chapter 7, and this appears to be in Revelation 13, the composite beast of those. So let's read a few verses here, and I think you'll see the connection. Because without that, if you just start reading the book of Revelation and come to chapter 13 and read the description, think, what's all that about? Then, of course, you can start speculating about probably Prince Charles or King Charles, or it's about Benjamin Netanyahu, or I think that's some reference there to Donald Trump, whatever it is, right? People jump all over the place and try and pull things out of the air. Well, if you look at Daniel 7 first, as we have done, to get your mind around the 4 beasts, right? The lion, the bear, the leopard with 4 heads, the great and terrible beast with the iron teeth, which persecutes the saints for times and half a time, right? And so on. Then you look at this, you think, oh, I recognize this. I think I know what it's referring to. Verse 1. Read verses 1 to 2, then 5, then 7 and 8. So verses 1 and 2. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. Daniel 7. So 4 great beasts coming out of the sea. Right? So it's pretty much pointing back, you would have thought. 4 beasts, Daniel 7, rising out of the great sea. And here John says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Same description, same environment. Having 7 heads and 10 horns. Well, 3 beasts had a head each, and the leopard had 4 heads, so 7 heads. And the 4th beast had 10 horns in Daniel 7. So this beast here has 7 heads and 10 horns. It's a composite beast. It's one beast here, but it's made up of the 4 beasts of Daniel chapter 7. And on his horns 10 crowns, on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. Oh, recognize the leopard. His feet, the feet of a bear. We recognize the bear. His mouth, the mouth of a lion. We recognize the lion. So just tick, 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 tick. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Well, that's new. I don't think there's anything in Daniel 7 that mentions the devil being the one empowering this final composite beast, but that tells us there the devil gives power to this particular beast, this empire. Dropping down to verse 5, and he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. Well, that sounds like the pompous horn, which blasphemed the God of heaven, and so on. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Well, that's times and half a time, albeit from a specific starting point. Well, again, that takes us back to Daniel 7. Times and half a time. Authority over them, possibly the law and times, right? Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. We saw that in Daniel 7. The pompous horn makes war against the saints, right, and overcomes them. So it's the same. It's the same beast. It's a composite beast, same time period, times and half a time, 42 months, same action, making war against the saints and overcoming them, right? Same beast. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. International influence and power, which of course Islam has. You find Islam everywhere. It's in the US, it's in Canada, it's in the UK, it's in Indonesia, it's in the Philippines, it's in Pakistan, of course, Bangladesh. It's across the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iran. It's in Asia Minor, Turkey. It's in Albania. everywhere. At the moment, there'll be more places, I guess, depending how long we are from these events. If this is another 25 years, it'll be far worse. If it's a few months away, then we probably see we're at pretty much the peak. We might be that close. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation or the throwing down of the world. That was the flood, of course. Right, so the whole world will worship this impressive empire and its might and its power and its ideology, its philosophy, its morality, right? Even though it's led by the devil. Seems a bit of a shame, but that's where we are. And if you know that, if you know what you're looking for, then when you see it, oh, I can see that's in Scripture. That's the Daniel 7 beasts. That's the Revelation 13 composite beast of those. I can see it. I know it's going to come next. Persecution against the saints, making war against them, and overcoming them. Oops, I'm a saint. I better watch out for this, right? If you don't know anything at all, you just sleepwalk into your destruction in all likelihood, right? So that's, I think, Daniel chapter 7 and its end time fulfillment just there in Revelation 13. So that's quite an important chapter in many, many ways. It's packed with symbols, beasts, destruction, time periods, and of course the Son of Man, Jesus coming back to set up his kingdom at the end of those particular empires. We certainly look forward to that part. Well, that's us for today, I think. And next week we'll pick up with Daniel chapter 8 and whatever we can get through in that period. So that's us for now, I think.